The name Camelot, it's this idea of a perfect kingdom, but there's also a real competition underneath that, an archaeological one. Across Britain, you've got these ancient sites. Fortresses, ruins, each one claims to be the historical Camelot, and you can look at the evidence yourself. There's a hill fort, for instance, with ramparts. A great hall stood there once. Then there's a settlement on a cliffside. It doesn't fit what we thought about the Dark Ages, and there's a broken wine glass from the Mediterranean found at a site. What's that doing at a king's court? And then a later king, he built a round table, knowing it was a fake, so the search for Arthur's capital. It's really about how a place turns into a story, how history becomes myth. What would make a place feel like Camelot to you? The story of Camelot was built long after any real fortress would have fallen to ruin. To find its foundations, you have to start with the storytellers. The Arthur we know, with the round table and the shining castle, that's a creation of the medieval mind. Centuries after the Romans left Britain, a cleric named Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote what he called a history of the British kings, and in it, he gave Arthur a grand biography. A sweeping empire, a roster of noble knights. This wasn't a dusty chronicle, it was a sensation. It took this shadowy figure, this possible war leader from a forgotten age, and dressed him in the armor of a 12th century monarch. Later, French poets added the chivalry. They added the romance of Guinevere and Lancelot, and that elusive, perfect court. Camelot itself is first named in a poem from this era. A literary flourish that captured the imagination of an entire continent. So what we're holding is not a map, it's a tapestry. Its threads are Celtic hero tales, the fading memory of Roman order, and the new Christian ideals of knighthood. That understanding changes everything. You're not looking for a castle that matches a storybook illustration. You're searching for a place powerful enough, mysterious enough, to have seeded such a magnificent dream. The legend gives us the questions, the earth may hold the answers. Cadbury Castle is a hill in Somerset. People have called it Camelot for centuries. That name is a clue. But the real evidence is in the ground. Archaeologists dug there in the 1960s. Leslie Alcock led the team. They found something. They found the remains of a great hall. It was built from timber, and it was built after the Romans left. This was a hall for a leader, for feasting, for council. They also found the old walls. The Iron Age ramparts, those had been rebuilt, made strong again at that same time. Someone had fortified this place. The work was enormous. It required a large workforce. It required organization, moving all that earth and timber. This wasn't a minor chief. This was a figure of power, someone holding a strategic position. The views from their command the countryside. You stand on those grassy walls now. You feel that history. The wind carries it, the echo of a warlord. A king perhaps making a stand. It's easy to see a place like this, a center of power in a dark age, how it could become a story, how it could become a song. Cadbury Castle feels like a place where legends start, but a king's legend doesn't come from just one place. It can come from the water, too. Up on the north coast of Cornwall, where the Atlantic just pounds the shore, there's Tintagel Castle. It's on this headland, almost an island. The ruins you see now, the gateways and the walls, that's from a later castle, medieval. But if you go down to that peninsula, the ground itself is older. Archaeology in recent years has sort of pulled back the layers, and they found a settlement, and it changes the whole idea of the Dark Ages. This wasn't some poor, cut-off place. They found pieces of pottery, fine and glossy, from Turkey, from North Africa, from the Mediterranean itself. This was tableware for wine and oil, shipped over thousands of miles of open sea. So whoever was here, they were trading with what was left of Rome. They had wealth, They had connections, real connections. They lived in good stone houses. And they could write. There's a slate, a practice slate with writing scratched into it. It has a name on it, Artagnu. It's not Arthur, but it's close. It's so close, a name from the right time, found in the right place. So Tintagel shows you a Britain after Rome that wasn't dark. It was connected, a place of sea kings, really. Merchant princes, where a story about a great leader born on a coast like this would make sense. So then, which one feels like Camelot, a hill fort inland looking over the land? Or this, a fortress right on the edge between the sky and the sea? Caerleon sits in South Wales. It's built on Isca, a fortress for the Second Augustan Legion. That was the hard edge of Roman Britain. When the legions left, they left something behind: stone walls, barracks in perfect grids, and a vast amphitheatre, its oval shape still there in the earth. For centuries after Rome fell, those ruins would have dominated everything. To the people living there, they weren't archaeology. They were the bones of giants. So you have a local chieftain, maybe in the 5th or 6th century, a man with ambition. He looks at this ready-made fortress. Its defenses were still strong. Its great hall, once a Roman basilica, could serve a new king, and that arena, where soldiers trained and crowds gathered. What would you call it? To a storyteller centuries later, it might have a familiar shape. The Round Table at Winchester is a painting on a wall, but Caerleon's Round Table is earth and stone, a real place where a real leader could gather his warriors. So the theory goes, Camelot isn't a memory of something new that was built. It's a memory of something old that was taken over. The myth isn't about inventing a perfect kingdom from nothing. It's about wanting to reclaim a lost age, order and grandeur. Those crumbling stones of a Roman fortress, echoing with new shouts, could easily become the shining towers of legend. So the question changes: are we looking for a British stronghold, or are we looking for the last echo of Rome taken up by a British king? The most famous Round Table isn't buried. It's hanging on a wall. In Winchester Castle, in the Great Hall, there's this huge wooden disc, painted with the names of Arthur's knights, and a big Tudor rose right in the center. That's Winchester's claim, and it's a completely different kind of claim. This isn't about finding some dark age fortress. It's about watching a legend get captured and put to work. Winchester was the royal capital, the capital of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex. That was Alfred the Great's realm, and later it stayed important for the Norman kings. By the 13th century, when this table was built, the stories of Arthur were everywhere, sweeping through the courts of Europe. So a king, maybe Edward I, had this table made. It was political theater. Then, centuries later, Henry VIII had it repainted. He put his own face at the top, styled as Arthur himself. The message was clear. The legend of Camelot and the right to rule it that belonged to the Tudors. This is where the search changes. It shifts from archaeology to propaganda. Winchester isn't arguing it's the historical Camelot. It's declaring itself as Camelot's rightful heir. The table is a fake, and everyone knew it was a fake. But its power was real. It shows how a story about a lost British king got adopted. Later monarchs used it to legitimize their rule, to craft a national myth, to connect themselves to a glorious past, even if that past was imaginary. So here, Camelot isn't a place you dig for, it's a symbol you hang on the wall. A tool to unify a kingdom, to dazzle its subjects. It asks a difficult question: is the real Camelot the one we might find, or is it the one we need to believe in? There's another sort of power in a city. Other sites point to isolated forts, but one idea says Camelot was a capital, Viroconium, in Shropshire now. The Romans called it Viroconium Cornovirum. We call it Wroxeter, and its story doesn't follow the usual collapse. It was one of the biggest cities in Roman Britain. Baths, basilicas, a hub, but the important part isn't its Roman grandeur. It's what happened after the legions left. Across Britain, many towns were just abandoned, left to fall apart. The evidence at Viroconium tells something else. Life didn't just continue, it flourished. For more than a century after the last Roman official was gone, people maintained this place. They weren't just squatting in ruins. They built new structures, large, sophisticated, using the old Roman methods. They repaired the public baths, they kept the streets clear, and that points to something deeper. A functioning, organized British society, a local government that could gather resources, that could marshal skilled labor. This wasn't a warlord's hill fort. This was a civilized administration holding the light. Now, the Arthurian legend. Arthur is often shown as the defender of British civilization against the Saxons. What better symbol for that civilization than a thriving Roman-style city, kept alive against the odds? A Camelot based here wouldn't just be a military headquarters. It would be a seat of law, of trade, of culture. It would be a statement: the old world isn't dead. We are still here, governing, building, living. The great hall of a king in a place like that wouldn't be a timber-made hall. It might have been the old basilica repurposed, a stone symbol of continuity. So the question gets compelling. Does the legend remember a lone, defiant fortress on a hill? Or does it remember the last gleaming city, a beacon of order in a changing land? Viroconium makes a silent argument, a stone argument for the latter. The legend has two ends, a beginning and an ending. Arthur's story doesn't finish in a great hall. It finishes on a field, a misty field, a bloody one. The last battle was Caerleon, and in Cornwall there's a place that claims that, the area around Camelford. It's a quiet town now. The River Camel goes through it. The name is like a whisper, Camelford, Caerleon. It feels direct, like the land remembers. Just outside town, there's Slaughter Bridge. The name says it all. Tradition for centuries says this is where Arthur fell, where he fought Mordred, his traitorous nephew, where Camelot died with him. Finding proof of an ancient battle is a task for ghosts. Swords rust, bones go back to the earth, the ground keeps its secrets, but the story persists here. That persistence is its own evidence, the power of place names. The River Camel gives this area its identity, and in the old tales, Caerleon is often a battle by a river. So if this was truly his last stand, then logic pulls us backward. His fortress, his seat of power, his Camelot, would likely have been somewhere in this river valley, his realm defined by this water. This contender isn't about walls or a hall. It's about a territory, a landscape of power that ends at a bridge. It asks us to think bigger than one castle, to see a kingdom mapped by legend, its heart somewhere along the Camel. Its end written in the name of a quiet Cornish stream. The search becomes less about a point on a map, more about the shape of a story told by the hills and the water. The geography of the legend isn't just the western coasts. There's another possibility much further north, a place that suggests a different kind of power. Hadrian's Wall in Cumbria, the Roman fort there, Cambaglana. We call it Birdoswald now. The name is the first clue, Cambaglana. It means crooked bank. In the old Celtic language, and when you hear it, it sounds familiar. Caerleon, the site of Arthur's last battle, that's more than just a sound alike. It feels like a connection, a historical place linked to a legendary event. The archaeology tells you something about this place. It endured. After the Romans left, this fort didn't just fall down. It was taken over, the big stone gates were fixed, the walls were kept up. For generations, local British leaders held it. They commanded this spot on the old frontier. A place built for defense, so think about a warlord in the 5th or 6th century. He doesn't build a new fortress, he takes the strongest one he can find. One built by Rome, looking out over the north. From there, he controls movement, he rallies fighters, he becomes the guardian, the dux bellorum, the leader of battles. A title they gave to Arthur. This idea changes the search. It says the roots of the Arthur story might not be in Cornwall or Wales, they might be here. In this military zone, a place defined by war, by always watching, stories about a great battle leader, a last stand, they fit here. The wind over the wall sounds like sentries. The crooked bank of the river earthing below, it might have seen a fight. Could a real commander holding the line at Camberglanna have been the start of the Arthur story? Of Camelot, it's a strong possibility. It means the myth isn't tied to one place. It could have come from the hard stone of a frontier just as easily as from the misty hills. So the search for Camelot is also a search for where a fading age made its last stand. There are so many possibilities, it can feel overwhelming. How do you even start to narrow it down? The process isn't about finding a winner, it's about learning to ask the right questions. Historians and archaeologists have a toolkit for this, a way of weighing each site against layers of evidence. The first layer is the written word, however faint. They look at the earliest texts that mention Arthur, the Historia Brittonum, the Annals Cambrii. These aren't detailed histories, they're brief entries, cryptic, lists of battles and dates. The challenge is huge. These documents were written centuries after the events, often for political reasons or religious ones, so the historian's job is to sift through the layers of storytelling, looking for a possible kernel of geographical truth. Does a battle name match a known location? Does a description of a leader's territory line up with a known post-Roman kingdom? It's detective work where the clues are themselves stories. The second tool is the language of the land, place name etymology, studying how names evolve over centuries. A name like the River Camel in Cornwall, or the Cam in Cadbury Castle, that sends researchers into old Celtic dictionaries, tracing how words for crooked or bent might have transformed into the sound of Camelot. But it's a tricky science. Names can be coincidental, or they can be applied later by people who already knew the legend, people wanting to claim it for their own home. So a promising name is a starting point, not proof. It's a whisper from the past. It says, look closer here. Then comes the physical evidence, the stuff you can touch. This is where archaeology speaks directly. Excavators aren't looking for a sign that says Camelot. They're looking for the footprint of a specific kind of power. In a specific window of time, the late 5th and 6th centuries, they search for signs of a high-status settlement, imported pottery from the Mediterranean. Like the fine ware found at Tintagel, that shows wealth, long-distance connections, animal bones from large-scale feasting, especially prime cuts of meat. That points to a leader who could reward his followers lavishly. Major defensive upgrades to old hill forts, like those at Cadbury, that signals a ruler with the authority to command a large workforce. For a massive public project, and the layout of the buildings matters, the remains of a large timber hall, set apart, that suggests a space for a ruler's court. Each of these findings is a piece of a profile. They help build a picture of a place that was a political center, a military center, during the very era Arthur is said to have lived. Finally, all this evidence is placed within the broader map, post-Roman Britain. A site might have a great hall and a fitting name, but does its location make historical sense? Could a powerful British kingdom have been based there, given what we know about Saxon expansion, about old tribal territories, about trade routes, a candidate in the far north? Like Birdoswald on Hadrian's Wall, that has to be evaluated against the political realities of a fragmented land. Was it a viable center for a figure whose legend is tied to the defense of Britain? This step forces the question out of the ground, into the wider world. It asks us to consider the landscape of power as a whole, so the search is this constant back and forth. Between text and soil, between a name and a geography, it's a complex puzzle. The pieces don't always fit neatly, and perhaps that's the point. The enduring mystery isn't a flaw in the evidence. It's the very thing that keeps the legend alive and the search for its home. This search is like trying to find a specific wave in a dark ocean. The main problem is time. We call it the Arthurian period, but that's just a guess. If a figure like Arthur did lead, historians usually put him in the decades after the Romans left Britain. Around 410 AD, but it wasn't a clean break. It was a slow unraveling, a time of movement, new people arriving, old alliances coming apart, and the profound difficulty is this era left almost no writing from the people who lived it. It's proto-historical. The light of recorded history had dimmed. We're left listening for echoes. What we do have comes from archaeology, and it shows dramatic, uneven change. In some places, like the city of Viroconium, life carried on with surprising order. In other places, the Roman economy collapsed completely. Coinage stopped. Imported goods became rare. Grand villas were abandoned, their mosaic floors slowly buried. This was a time of reconfiguration, not just of kingdoms but of identity. Communities had to reinvent how they governed, how they traded, how they defended their homes. Into that landscape, a war leader could rise, a dux bellorum. But pinning that rise to a specific decade or even a half-century is where the fog settles in. Modern science helps, but it can't clear the fog entirely. Techniques like radiocarbon dating are invaluable. They can analyze a piece of charcoal from a feast or a bone and tell us it's from, say, the years between 450 and 550 AD. That's a century-long window. It's a range, not a pinpoint. So when we find evidence of a powerful figure at Cadbury Castle or a wealthy trader at Tintagel, we can place them broadly in this post-Roman twilight. But we can't say this hall was built in the exact year a man named Arthur won at Badon. The chronology is too wide, too soft at the edges, and that uncertainty changes the whole quest. It means compelling evidence of a major British leader from anywhere in the 5th, 6th, or even early 7th centuries could, theoretically, be folded into the later legend. A great victory in 520 could be remembered as Arthur's triumph. A skilled ruler in 580 could have his deeds given to the earlier, more famous name. The search becomes broader and, in a way, more difficult. We're not looking for a needle in a haystack from one specific year. We're looking for any needle that fits a description in a haystack that spans 200 years. That's why so many sites can make a credible claim. They're not all lying. They're all pointing to moments of localized power, shining like brief candles in that long historical night. And the legend, growing later, gathered all that scattered light into one brilliant flame. The evidence for a great hall isn't just the shape in the ground. It's what people left there. A post hole shows where a timber was, but what you find inside that space tells you how they lived, and that's where the story of a possible Camelot gets vivid. They sift the soil for a specific profile of power, the structure first. They map the post holes looking for a rectangle much larger than a common house. Big enough for dozens, maybe 100 people to gather. This was the social engine of a Dark Age kingdom, where a leader would be seen, where oaths were sworn. But a big, empty room isn't enough. You need signs of what happened. The smaller finds become telling. Imagine the fragments, shards of thin, delicate glass. For drinking vessels, not everyday cups, this wasn't rough local pottery. It was a luxury item, hinting at ceremonial drinking, toasts, and shared rituals among an elite. Then, the ground around the hall's entrance or a refuse pit. The animal bones tell a tale. A high concentration from young animals, the prime cuts, the shoulder, the leg. This is the signature of large-scale feasting. It shows a leader with resources to host often, to reward followers with the best food. This is how loyalty was cemented in that era. Through generosity displayed in that hall, but perhaps the most compelling clue comes from far away, pottery that doesn't belong in Britain at all. The thick, pointed base of an amphora, a jar for wine or oil from the Eastern Mediterranean. Or fragments of fine, red slip tableware, African red slipware from North Africa. Finding these is like a shipping manifest from a forgotten world. Proof of long-distance trade networks that survived after Rome's collapse. To have these goods, a leader needed wealth, tin, silver, hunting dogs, and he needed connections. Diplomatic links across the sea. This isn't an isolated warlord. This is a sophisticated court, with access to exotic luxuries, with tastes that remembered Roman refinement. With a political savvy to maintain friendships across the water, a place exactly like that, a beacon of wealth in a dim age, is the kind of place that would be remembered. Its glory would grow in the telling, passed down, its name becoming a byword for a lost golden age. So when you hold a piece of that imported pottery, you're not just holding clay. You're holding a tiny piece of a reputation, the kind of reputation that, centuries later, poets would call Camelot. The strongest evidence doesn't always come from the dirt. It can come through the air, in the stories people tell each other, passed down. That's oral tradition, that's folklore. Long before any archaeologist arrived at Cadbury Hill, the people nearby already had a name for it. They called it Arthur's Palace. They talked about a king sleeping inside the hill with his knights waiting. They told stories about riders seen at night, the sound of horses coming from the old walls. These aren't scientific facts. You can't run a test on a ghost story, but if you ignore them, you're missing something. This folklore is a kind of cultural memory. It's a belief system centuries old that connects people to the land. It's intangible, a map that isn't drawn on paper but held in the mind of a community. For them, the hill wasn't just a hill, it was a sacred place full of meaning. Their stories kept a truth alive, not necessarily the truth of events but of significance. They remembered this place was important, that power was here, that something extraordinary happened, and this memory could act as a guide. The early antiquarians, the first people looking for the past, they would go to a place and ask the oldest people what they knew. Where the old stories were set, which field was haunted, those tales became the first clues. They pointed the way to sites that history had overlooked. The legend of Arthur has its own geography, a kind of shadow map of Britain, where certain hills or springs or caves are marked by story. A cave in Wales holds his treasure. A well in Somerset is where the sword was thrown. These stories create a pilgrimage in the mind. They tell us Camelot isn't just a historical problem. It's a living part of the landscape. The soil holds the bones of a place, but the stories hold its soul. They ask us to listen differently, not just with tools but with imagination. To see that sometimes the search for a lost kingdom starts with a story. A grandmother pointing to a hill and saying, "That's where the king is sleeping." The round table is a promise. A circle has no head. No one seat has more power. It's a fellowship, a council of equals, all bound by the same oath. That's the real appeal of Camelot. Not just a strong king, but a noble idea. But an idea needs a physical form. It needs a place to exist. Could a table like that have been real, not a polished medieval disc? Something older, something that inspired the story, so the search changes. It's not about a piece of furniture anymore. It's about a kind of space, an environment where a circular council would make sense. And in the world after Rome, two possibilities come from the landscape. The first is the repurposed ruin. Picture a British chieftain and his warriors standing in the overgrown oval of a Roman amphitheatre. Like the one at Caerleon, the stone seats rising all around them. It's a natural gathering place, engineered for an audience. A leader speaking from that central arena is literally surrounded by his men. The shape itself commands a kind of unity. It's a ready-made round table carved from the earth by a vanished empire. The other possibility is older. Much older, the Neolithic henge, a circular bank and ditch often aligned with the sky. These places were already ancient beyond memory in Arthur's time. Sacred spaces in the landscape. So what if a post-Roman leader chose a place like that for a great gathering? to tap into its ancient power, to meet his warriors on ground that felt consecrated by time. The circular form was already there, just waiting, so the legendary table might not have been wood. It could have been turf and chalk, a space defined by a ditch under an open sky. That changes the quest. We're not looking for a carved relic in a museum. We're looking for a geography of gathering, a place where the ritual of council felt right. Where the architecture, whether man-made or natural, fostered the illusion of equality among a band of elite fighters. The later table, the magnificent one in Winchester Hall, shows how the symbol was captured. It was painted with knights' names and a Tudor rose, a tool for political theatre. It declared, "This is ours now," but the original inspiration probably came from something more raw. A memory of warriors standing in a circle, on old stones or within an older earthwork deciding the fate of a kingdom. That memory of a council without a clear head is what made the story so powerful. It wasn't about a piece of furniture, it was about an ideal given a shape by the land itself. But the Saxon Chronicles don't say anything, there's just silence. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, that's our main source for the early English kingdoms. It lists events year by year, battles, kings, the progress of their settlement. And in all those entries, there's no mention of a British war leader named Arthur. No record of a huge defeat at Mount Badon, something that stopped their advance for a generation. For a lot of people, that silence is the strongest argument. It means Arthur is probably fiction. How could a figure that monumental be completely absent from the records of the people he fought? Well, you have to understand what these chronicles are and what they aren't. They aren't objective news reports. They were put together later, often in the courts of Saxon kings. Meant to legitimize their rule, to glorify their ancestry, they tell a story of destiny, divine favor, inevitable victory. In that kind of story, a major setback, an embarrassing one, it doesn't fit the plot. A temporary check to their expansion, a formidable British adversary who united the tribes against them, that might just be left out. Or maybe that adversary was recorded under a different name. A title we don't recognize anymore. The Chronicles give us a victor's history, polished, purposeful. The Archaeology tells a different story, a messier one. It shows the Saxon settlement wasn't a single, relentless wave. It was a complex process, patchwork, a slow seep into some areas, violent takeover in others. Long periods of coexistence and negotiation in between. In that fragmented landscape, there was absolutely room for periods of fierce British resurgence. For local kings to rally their people, to win battles, to forge a temporary peace, a leader could be immensely powerful in his own region, shape events for decades, and still never make it into the official history of his enemies. His fame would live on in the songs of his own people, growing with each telling, while his name faded from the records of those he defeated. So the silence in the Saxon Chronicles, it isn't proof Arthur didn't exist. It's proof that history is written by the survivors, and sometimes the most compelling stories are the ones they chose to forget. We have to look somewhere else because the Chronicles are silent. We have to learn to see without digging, and modern archaeology can do that. It can map a lost world under the ground before you ever dig. That's geophysical survey. It's like an X-ray for the landscape. Archaeologists use tools that listen, magnetometers. You carry them over a field in a grid. They measure tiny changes in the Earth's magnetic field. When soil is heated by a hearth, a kiln, a long burning fire, the minerals can become permanently magnetized. That leaves a signature. A pit full of rotting rubbish or a storage pit will have a different magnetic quality than the hard earth around it. A buried stone wall, a ditch filled with softer soil, each one disrupts the ground. The magnetometer records that. Another tool is ground-penetrating radar. It sends energy pulses down and listens for the echoes as they bounce back. It senses changes in density. A solid foundation reflects the signal differently than loose soil. When you process all this data, you get a map, not of the surface, but of what's underneath. A map of shadows. At Tintagel, this was transformative. The surveys showed not just a few buildings on the cliff, but the outline of a whole terraced settlement. Dozens of structures laid out along the headland, streets, pathways, a complex community hidden just under the turf. This changes the search for a place like Camelot. Before you commit to years of costly excavation, a survey can tell you the potential scale. It answers the first question: is there something significant here? At Cadbury Castle, surveys helped pinpoint the location of the Great Hall before they dug. They showed the density of features inside the ramparts, hinting at a busy interior. For a candidate site, a clear geophysical map showing a large, organized complex from the right period is powerful evidence. It suggests planning, authority, population. It reveals the hidden footprint of a Dark Age palace, so the quest starts not with a spade, but with a slow walk across a field. A walk that listens to the stories the soil has kept secret for 1500 years. The Britons didn't stop at Hadrian's Wall. The name tells you that Britons, they were north as well. Their kingdoms went up into what's now Scotland. And one of their strongest fortresses is still there, Dumbarton Rock. It's a completely different kind of place, not a grassy hill fort, it's a volcanic plug. Basalt, it rises right where the River Leven meets the Clyde. Like a stone sentinel, for centuries this was the capital, the Kingdom of Strathclyde. A British kingdom, they spoke a language like Welsh, and they held out against Picts, against Scots, against Vikings, all the way to the 11th century. That timeline is astonishing. It wasn't a brief moment after Rome. This was a sustained realm, lasting over 600 years after the legions left. Dumbarton isn't in the early Arthur stories, but its existence changes the map. It's the sort of place a northern Arthwys could have ruled from. That name, Arthwys. It means bear man. It's in the old genealogies. The northern British king lists, so a bear king, a powerful leader in the north. That idea is historically plausible. His fortress wouldn't be a castle. It would be a place like this, a natural stronghold, surrounded by water, almost unconquerable, a seat of power for a people always under pressure. This expands the search. It suggests the core legend, the great defender, could have formed in any of these kingdoms, the hero fighting the darkness. He isn't tied to Tintagel or to Cadbury. He could be a memory from the wars along the Clyde, a story that traveled south with bards, with refugees, merging slowly with other tales until it found its famous name, Arthur. So Dumbarton Rock isn't just a castle, it's a stubborn fact, a fact that says the British resistance was a northern story too. And in that long fight for survival, many leaders could have earned a song. One of those songs may have traveled further than anyone imagined. The name Camelot first appeared in a poem. It was a French poet, Chrétien de Troyes, in the 12th century. He's the one who gave Arthur's court that name, that magical name, but he gave no directions. No landscape, no kingdom. It was a literary flourish, a backdrop for tales of chivalry, for romance, for Chrétien. Camelot was a stage. Its location was whatever served the story. It could be here or it could be there, a movable feast of the imagination, and that's the crucial pivot, the most famous name for Arthur's capital. It wasn't born from history. It was born from fiction, a French fiction. It crossed the channel as part of a cultural wave, a new fashion for knightly tales. So when we try to pin Camelot to a map of Britain, we're chasing a French poet's dream. We're trying to find soil for a seed that was planted in the air. Centuries later, an English writer tried to bring it all home, Sir Thomas Malory. He wrote Le Morte d'Arthur while imprisoned. He compiled the French romances, the Welsh legends, the English Chronicles. He created the definitive version for the English-speaking world, and in his great work, he uses the name Camelot. He gives it weight, a sense of permanence, yet tellingly, Malory is also vague on where it is. He mentions Winchester and Camelot almost interchangeably. He isn't concerned with geography, he's concerned with tragedy, with the fall of a great ideal. For Malory, Camelot is less a place and more a state of grace. One that is always slipping away. These writers were artists, not surveyors. They placed Camelot where it best served their narrative, or sometimes where it best pleased their patron. A story set in a glorious, unspecified court could flatter a local lord without making a risky claim. It was safer, more universal. This literary evolution means our quest is layered. We are not just digging through earth, we are sifting through centuries of storytelling. Each layer adds something, a detail, a mood, a name. The attempt to find a historical Camelot becomes an act of reverse engineering. We start with a magnificent, finished castle of words, and we try to work backward, searching for the humble foundation stone that might have inspired it all. Was it a hill fort that seemed grand enough, a ruined city that felt ancient enough? The writers gave us the shining tower. The archaeologists are left looking for the footprint in the mud. And in that space between the story and the soil, the real mystery of Camelot forever resides. After Rome, the light didn't go out, it just moved into the monasteries. Into the scriptorium. These were the strongholds now. Their walls were faith, their wealth was books. While kings fought over land, monks were fighting for memory. In those quiet cloisters, they became the last historians. They copied texts, they kept chronicles, they wrote down the lineages of kings. And it's here, in this chain of handwritten words, that the name Arthur shows up. Not on stone, on parchment, inked carefully. The work of these scribes gives us the first threads, but you have to read it with clear eyes. A monastery's chronicle wasn't neutral. It was a political statement, a spiritual one. A monk in Wales saw things differently than a monk in Cornwall or in Saxon lands. Their accounts were shaped by loyalty, by patronage, by the desire to show their own people in a heroic light. So when a British monk writes about a great victory at Badon Hill, led by a war leader named Arthur, he's doing more than noting a fact. He's crafting an identity. He's saying we weren't just overrun, we had heroes, we had a moment of glory. That's the crucible, where history and hope got fused together. Some scholars look at this and wonder, could Arthur himself have come from inside these walls, not as a king, as a patron, a wealthy landowner who endowed a monastery? His generosity remembered and then magnified over generations. Or maybe as a warrior saint, a local champion who defended church lands from raiders. His deeds sanctified by the community he protected. The line between a historical benefactor and a legendary king, that line could blur very easily in the stories told by the fireside in a monastic guest house. So the connection isn't that a monastery was Camelot. It's that the monastery was the workshop where the idea of Camelot was assembled. These were the places where scattered local tales got collected. A brave chieftain here, a just ruler there, written down and slowly woven into a grander national narrative, a story meant to give a fragmented people a shared past. A story powerful enough to outlast kingdoms, so when you hold a fragment of an old chronicle, you're not just holding evidence, you're holding the tool. The tool that built a myth, the quiet scratch of a quill in a candlelit room that did more to create Arthur's world than any sword. The legend isn't only in the ground. It's in the gift shop. From the very beginning, when pilgrims first went to a holy well or some strange rock, the story of Arthur has been an economic force. A commercial Camelot, a landscape shaped by what visitors expect as much as by any historical fact. Take Tintagel. Those dramatic castle ruins there now, they weren't built by some dark age king. They were built in the 1230s by a wealthy noble, Earl Richard of Cornwall. He was the English king's brother, and he built his fortress on that remote headland for one reason. The site was already famous in local stories. It was known as Arthur's birthplace. He wasn't discovering history, he was branding it. His castle was a medieval tourism venture. A physical claim on a popular legend to boost his own prestige. That pattern continues. Centuries later at Glastonbury, monks in the 12th century said they found the graves of Arthur and Guinevere. The timing was convenient. A fire had destroyed their abbey. They needed money to rebuild, and discovering Britain's most famous king right there in their grounds that would guarantee pilgrims. It would guarantee their donations. Whether it was a fraud or a real belief, the effect was the same. It put Glastonbury on the map for good. Now, the machinery is more sophisticated, but the impulse is the same. Visitor centers show artists' impressions of a shining Camelot. Signposts point to Merlin's cave or the site of the Round Table. There are reconstructed Dark Age halls. Statues of a brooding king looking out to sea. This doesn't mean the archaeology is fake. The imported pottery at Tintagel is real. The Grand Hall at Cadbury is real. But over that authentic foundation, we add a layer, a crafted experience, a narrative to help us feel the legend, to walk where Arthur walked. That modern interpretation creates a loop. The stories attract visitors. The visitors fund preservation and research, and that research sometimes finds new, genuine things, which then feed the stories again. So the search for the real Camelot isn't just academic anymore. It's a cultural performance. The legend's power is measured in ticket sales, in local economies. In the joy of a family exploring a ruin, feeling that connection to a myth, that commercial life proves something. Arthur's capital was never just a place. It is, and always has been, a destination for the imagination. Glastonbury Abbey had a different kind of claim, not about a fortress, it was about a grave. In 1191, the monks announced a discovery. They said they'd found the bones of King Arthur and Guinevere, his queen. The story had detail. There was a lead cross with the remains, an inscription in Latin. It said, "Here lies buried the famous King Arthur in the Isle of Avalon." That wasn't a hint. It was a statement, and it worked. Pilgrims came, patrons came, the abbey's prestige went up. Its income went up. Now the timing, from here it's telling. A fire had destroyed much of the abbey a few years before. Rebuilding was expensive. It needed funds. It needed a draw. And the discovery of Britain's most legendary king, that was the draw. Most historians now see this as a fraud, a pious fraud, a fabrication for a holy purpose, to secure their religious house, but calling it just a hoax misses the point. It misses the significance. This is how history gets made or remade. The monks didn't just find a story, they planted it in the earth, then they dug it up for everyone to see. They gave the legend a body, a resting place. They anchored a floating myth to a specific piece of ground, sacred ground, and by doing that, they claimed the narrative. Glastonbury became Avalon, the Isle of Arthur's final sleep. This was institutional power, wielded through storytelling. It shows us the search for Camelot isn't just hard from a lack of evidence. It's sometimes complicated by the creation of evidence, by artifacts made to fill a need. That lead cross, if it existed, was theatre, a prop, in a performance that reshaped how Britain saw its own past. It asks us to be gentle archaeologists, but critical ones, of information itself, to look at any dramatic historical claim and ask, who benefits, what need does it fill? At Glastonbury, the need was survival. The story built a foundation more durable than stone. It turned a local abbey into a national shrine, and that act reminds us. The past is never just buried, it's always in some way being built. Stone castles came later. They belonged to a settled kind of power. Arthur's world was different. It was a world of movement. A king then wasn't stationary. He didn't hold court in just one grand hall. He traveled. His court moved with him. This was practical. A king and his retinue, warriors, advisors, servants, they were a large group. They consumed enormous resources. Staying in one place would exhaust the local area. So they traveled a circuit between royal estates, between the halls of loyal sub-kings. They consumed the food renders owed to them. They dispensed justice. Their presence reinforced the king's authority. Where the king was, that was the center of the kingdom. That was the court. So Camelot might not have been a place. It might have been a condition, the condition of the king being present. The legendary name might not refer to a specific fortress. It might refer to the idea of the itinerant court itself. Wherever the king and his elite warriors were lodged, feasting in a great hall, that temporary center could be remembered as Camelot. The splendor in the later tales, then, wouldn't be one impossibly magnificent castle. It would be an amalgamation, a collective memory of several high-status sites, the grandest hall in one region, the most secure hill fort in another, the most scenic stronghold by the sea. Over generations, these separate places, all visited by the king, could have merged into one perfect mythical capital. This theory finds an echo in the archaeology. Look at the pattern of sites, not as rivals but as points on a possible circuit. A powerful ruler in the southwest, in the 5th or 6th century, might have moved his court between a refurbished hill fort like Cadbury Castle for mustering warriors, a coastal post like Tintagel for receiving envoys and goods, a lowland estate center for administering justice. Each site shows evidence of high-status activity from roughly the same period. Imported goods, feasting remains, defensive upgrades. They don't all have to be the one Camelot. They could each be a piece of it, a node in a network of power. The legend then becomes a simplification. The human mind prefers a single, shining image. A castle on a hill. So the complex, mobile reality of Dark Age kingship, the traveling court, the seasonal rounds, it gets condensed over centuries into a single, fixed location. A location that never existed as such, but whose spirit was alive every time the king's standard was raised outside a new hall. So the search shifts. It's not about a pinpoint on a map. It's about tracing a route, the ghost of a royal progress still haunting the landscape. The land around a Dark Age fortress wasn't just scenery. It was a system, a living one. To grasp a king's power, you have to see his territory, what grew in it, what animals moved across it, how the people there ate. This is where environmental archaeology comes in. It pays attention to the smallest things. Pollen grains saved for centuries in peat or lake mud, charred seeds from old hearths, cattle bones, sheep bones, pig bones left behind after a meal. These pieces are like little capsules. They don't record battles, they record bread, meat. Wood for the fire. You take soil from a ditch near an old hall. Under a microscope, you can see the pollen caught in it. A lot of grass pollen means open pasture. Land for grazing herds, cereal pollen, wheat, barley, that means fields nearby, active farming, a mix of tree pollen, oak and hazel, that might mean managed woodland. For coppicing, for building, for fuel, this information draws a map, not of kingdoms but of ecology. It shows whether a place like Cadbury Castle was an isolated stronghold in wild country, or the center of a cleared, active landscape. A king who ruled wide, productive farmland had a different kind of authority than a king whose domain was mostly forest. Then there are the animal bones. Their age and their condition are like a ledger. A site with bones from very young lambs or calves might point to dairying. Bones from older, well-fed cattle, especially certain cuts, the shoulder, the leg, that's the mark of elite feasting. And wild species, deer, boar, wildfowl, that can be significant. Were they just occasional extra food, or was there evidence of managed deer parks? A controlled hunting reserve was a royal privilege. A status symbol, a leisure ground long before the Norman idea of forest law. This scientific picture changes how we view a candidate for Camelot. A powerful court wasn't just a military base. It was an economic engine. It needed a stable hinterland that produced a surplus to support the warriors and craftspeople and servants who weren't farming. Signs of large-scale grain storage, of specialized butchery, of landscapes shaped for both production and prestige. That's the foundation of kingship. It shows a ruler who didn't just take, he organized, he managed, he changed the land itself to feed his ambition. So the search isn't only for stone and post holes. It's for the ghost of an ancient field, the echo of a lost herd. The real seat of power was fed by the ground it stood on. Maybe we're asking the wrong thing. Maybe it's not about finding Camelot on a map. It's about why we keep looking, why we need it to be a real place. This digging in fields, this reading of old texts, it's something deeper. It's this human need. Camelot is that perfect moment, a flash of justice, of order, a kind of nobility shining in what we think of as a dark time. It's the story of a kingdom that worked for a little while before it collapsed, and now, when things feel broken or uncertain, that search for its physical location, it tells us something. It's a search for hope, a need to believe that our best ideals, good leadership, fellowship, a society built on something true, that they aren't just stories. That they could have been built on actual ground, on real stone. So the archaeology, the surveys, the sifting for a piece of old glass, it's an act of faith. We're trying to pin this beautiful story down to fact, to prove the dream had a doorstep, and that shows how stories change a landscape. A hill in Somerset isn't just a hill. It's Arthur's palace. A cliff in Cornwall isn't just rock. It's where legends began. We give these places meaning more than geology, and in return they give our myths an anchor. A place we can go and touch. In the end, this endless search touches on big questions: identity, leadership, what we leave behind. Are we descended from something noble? What does good leadership look like when things are hard? How do we want to be remembered? Arthur and his court, they're a mirror for that. So the relentless hunt for Camelot, that actually proves the legend's real power. Its greatest treasure isn't a hidden crown or a sword in a stone. It's this ability to keep inspiring, to make us look at a grassy mound or some old ruins and wonder, what if? To drive us for centuries to keep looking for the best version of our past, hoping it might show us what we could still become. The most compelling answer isn't in one place. It's in many. A legend this enduring, this rich, doesn't come from a single source. It grows, it gathers, it collects memories like a river collects streams. So Camelot might not be a lost city to unearth. It might be a composite, a mosaic assembled over centuries, each tile a different piece of Britain after Rome. Think about the military authority of a place like Cadbury Castle. Its ramparts rebuilt, its great hall a beacon of power. That's one piece. Then there's the cosmopolitan flair of Tintagel. Its fine Mediterranean tableware, its connections across the sea, speaking to a court of wealth and wide horizons. That's another. Blend in the ready-made grandeur of Caerleon. Its Roman amphitheatre, a natural gathering place for warriors, echoing with the ghost of imperial order. And then consider the civilized continuity of Viroconium. A functioning Roman-style city, holding the light of administration and law long after the empire faded. Each place represents a different facet of what a powerful kingdom needed to be. Strong, connected, impressive, ordered, separately, they're impressive sites, but in memory over generations of retelling, their distinct identities could blur. The story needed a capital, so the mind created one. It took the fortress from one hill, the imported wine from another coast, the stone arena from a third valley, and the paved streets from a fourth town. It wove them together into a single, perfect court. This synthesis doesn't give a map with a big X. It gives something more profound, an understanding of how myth works. The search for Camelot isn't a failure because we haven't found one winner. It's a success because we've found so many contenders. Each site contributes a verse to the poem. The hill fort offers the stanza about strength. The coastal settlement provides the verse about trade and mystery. The Roman town gives the lines about lore and legacy. Together, they form the complete song. This honors the complexity of real history, which is messy and multi-sided, and it respects the creative, unifying power of storytelling. We didn't lose Camelot. We never had it as a single place. We built it piece by piece from the best our past had to offer. And in doing that, we built a symbol that could belong to everyone, everywhere. The true location of Camelot might always stay out of reach, a castle made from the stories we tell, but the search still meant something. The search was the discovery. It went across a landscape of memory, from the fortified ramparts of Cadbury Castle to the windswept cliffs of Tintagel. Each place offers something. A piece of the puzzle. Cadbury is about raw military power, a warlord's stronghold. Tintagel whispers of birth, of distant connections, trade and mystery. Then Caerleon and Viroconium, they present the weight of legacy, the dream of taking back Roman order. Winchester shows us the symbol, a legend captured and used to build a nation. Together, they form a portrait, a composite of what we need Camelot to be. We might never dig up a signpost, one that says Arthur was here. We might never find the round table itself, buried in the earth, but archaeology gave us something else, something just as valuable. It lit up the world that could have created that story, a world of resilient British kingdoms. Sea routes still open to the Mediterranean, leaders who rebuilt hill forts, who feasted in great halls. That was the fertile ground, the ground where the legend grew. So the real Camelot isn't a single point on a map. It exists in the conversation, the dialogue between the stories we tell and the soil that holds the evidence. It lives in that space between a poet's dream and an archaeologist's trowel. This quest enriches us. It deepens our understanding of an era, a shadowy, transformative time. And it reminds us the past's greatest power is often that inspiration, to make us look at a grassy hill and wonder about the echoes it holds.